This puppy tried to get into the store every day, but no one knew why. When they found out the truth, they couldn't hold back the tears. Imagine the scene. The store door opens. The flow of customers comes and goes, carrying bags, chatting, going about their routines. But there, right at the entrance, standing with his dirty paws on the cold floor, he is. Small, thin, with scruffy hair and attentive eyes. The cub hesitates for a moment. Their little eyes shine with a mix of hope and anxiety. He takes a step inside, the heart beats fast. Maybe today they'll let him stay, maybe today he can... But no. Before he even reaches his destination, a firm voice stops him. "Hey, get out of here, dog!" The small body flinches for a second, but he doesn't run away. Just back away slowly, like someone who already knows rejection, as someone who already expects this to happen. He lowers his head and turns away from the door. But it won't go away. No matter how many times he gets kicked out, he always comes back. And that was what began to intrigue those who saw him every day. Why did he do this? What was inside that store that made him insist so much? If it was just hunger, he could look for food elsewhere. If it was a shelter, why wasn't it under a marquee? But no, he wanted to enter. And it wasn't for any reason. Employees found it irritating. Customers, at most, found it curious. But no one stopped to ask, what did that puppy see there that no one else saw? And that was what made everything even more mysterious. Because when he entered, or at least tried to enter, he didn't behave like any street dog. He didn't run. He didn't rummage through bags. He didn't ask for food. He just looked, always to the same place, always with the same look. There was something there, something that no one noticed. Yet, it didn't matter how many times he was kicked out. It didn't matter how cold the sidewalk was or how wet he got on rainy days. Nothing made him give up. That store, that place, that specific corner. Every day, without fail, the puppy returned. His thin and fragile body, his paws dirty from the city floor, his gaze filled with something that no one seemed to notice. He didn't beg for food. He didn't bark. He didn't make a fuss. He just tried to get in, and when he couldn't, he sat there outside, as if he was waiting. But waiting what? Time passed, and his presence became part of the store's routine. The employees were already tired of shooing him away, but the dog didn't fight, didn't bite, didn't fight back. He would just back off and come back the next day, always looking at the same corner, always with that same expression. Most people ignored him. Some even sympathized, throwing leftover food at him on the sidewalk. But that wasn't what he wanted. The puppy smelled the food for a few seconds and turned its attention to the store, as if there was something much more important in there. "What does this dog want so much here?" asked an employee, frowning as he shooed the animal away for the 5th time that day. But no one knew the answer, because who would really bother to find out? Stray dogs exist everywhere. They are invisible to most, just one of many. But he was different. He didn't give up, and maybe that was the detail that made some people start to notice. It wasn't normal for such a small, vulnerable dog to return to the same place every day, with the same hope in his eyes. It was as if he was waiting for someone finally understood. But nobody understood. The days passed, the puppy returned, and nothing changed. If you've ever been around dogs, you might know that look that seems to be trying to say something, something that words cannot explain. This puppy had that look, a look that didn't ask for food. He didn't ask for affection. He asked to be seen. He looked inside the store, fixing his bright little eyes on a specific point, without caring about what was happening around him. It didn't matter how many people passed by, how many times the door opened and closed. I just looked at that corner. What was there? What held your attention so much? The employees who had previously expelled him without patience began to become intrigued. Is that dog here again? He doesn't give up. What does he see in there? Nobody knew. But for the cub, it was evident. There was something there, something that mattered more than anything. And I wouldn't rest until I got closer. What was in that store, in that specific corner, that made that little dog come back day after day, even without being welcome? The answer was still hidden, but not for long. Have you ever seen a dog with a look that seemed to say something, but no one understood? This puppy wouldn't give up, and there was a reason for that. Something that no one saw, but for him, it was everything. What was he trying to show us? Now tell me in the comments, have you ever witnessed an animal insisting on something in a way that no one could explain? Maybe a dog that always returned to the same place, or a cat that seemed to see something that no one else saw. I will love reading your story. And if you, like me, feel that animals have special ways of communicating with us, subscribe to the channel to follow this and many other incredible stories. Oh, and leave your like to help this message reach more people. This dog wasn't just any street dog. With each passing day, he seemed more determined. People were coming in and out of the store, but the puppy was still there. Sometimes I tried to take a step inside. Other times I just sat on the sidewalk and waited. His gaze, always fixed on that same corner, seemed to contain a secret that no one bothered to unveil. Most people just didn't notice. It was just another skinny, dirty dog, one of many that roamed the city. But some began to notice. "This dog is always here," commented a lady while choosing some fruit from the shopping cart. The attendant shrugged. "Yes, but we always send him away. He comes back every day." "But why?" The response was an uncomfortable silence. Nobody knew. The client looked at the puppy, who was now sitting, watching. His dark eyes were deep, as if they were waiting for something. But what? She smiled and took a small piece of bread out of her bag, throwing it towards him. The puppy looked at the food, but didn't eat it. This made the woman frown. Strange. If a stray dog is always in the same place, the answer is usually simple: hunger. But that didn't seem to be the case. I didn't want food, and that was starting to get some people intrigued. Even with some customers wondering about the puppy, most simply didn't care. These street dogs always appear here. He must be waiting for someone to give him food, that's all. Someone should take him away, poor thing. Some people looked with pity, but then continued with their purchases. Others didn't even realize he was there. And in the midst of so many distracted and indifferent looks, the puppy continued, stopped, looking, waiting. Even though he is so small, even though he has been chased away so many times, he didn't give up. But will anyone really? Did you see what was happening? That was what made the few who noticed it intrigued. If he were like other street dogs, he would have already gone somewhere else in search of food. If he wanted shelter, he would be lying under some awning, trying to escape the scorching sun or the cold rain. But no, he came back, he looked. He always fixed his eyes in the same place. Something inside that store caught your attention in a way that no one could understand, and this began to cause subtle discomfort among employees. "Have you noticed that he never looks at us?" asked one of the attendants, crossing his arms. "He doesn't even pay attention when we tell him to leave." True, he just looks at that corner. They followed the dog's gaze, trying to understand what attracted him so much. But for them there was nothing special there, just a hallway with some shelves, stacked boxes. Nothing that justified that insistence. Nothing to explain why a stray puppy would return to the same place every day, even without receiving anything in return. But there was an explanation, and she was about to be discovered. Have you ever had that feeling that something doesn't make sense, but somehow has an explanation? That was exactly what started to bother one of the store employees. Until that moment, the puppy was just a nuisance, a detail in the routine, something that was always there, but that no one really paid attention to. But the more he looked, the more he realized that this dog wasn't like the others. He didn't ask for food. He didn't cower in fear. He didn't bark or jump on people for attention. He just stayed there every day, trying to get in, and when he couldn't, he simply sat and stared at that same corner of the store. That one, it wasn't normal. And for the first time, someone asked themselves why. The employee spent the entire day paying attention to the puppy. He tried to ignore it, tried to continue his routine, but every time he looked at the store's entrance, there it was, firm, unshakable, looking inside, as if expected something. And it was then that something made him make a decision. It was the end of the day. The last customers left. The other employees closed the register, organized the shelves, ready for another day that was ending. But outside, the cub was still there. He didn't seem discouraged. He didn't look tired, just expected. "What were you expecting?" "I'll follow him." The phrase slipped out almost without thinking, and one of the co-workers laughed. "Are you going to follow a stray dog now?" But the employee did not respond. He just grabbed his backpack and left. The dog noticed the movement, but did not react, just waited. So when the last light in the store went out, he turned and started walking. It was the first time someone really paid attention to where that puppy went after the store closed. The employee kept a safe distance, trying not to scare him. The cub walked without hesitation. I knew exactly where I was going. He didn't wander aimlessly. He didn't smell trash cans along the way. He didn't look around. He just followed. The employee began to feel his heart beating faster. The city began to get quieter as the night wore on. The dog passed through some streets, crossed a square, dodged some people who were walking quickly, and then he stopped. What did you think of the employee's attitude? Would you also have followed the puppy? Tell me in the comments what you would have done in his place. In the narrow alley between two buildings, where the light from the streetlights barely reached, the puppy bent down and entered. The official hesitated. "What are you doing here, little boy?" But the cub didn't look back. He had arrived where I wanted to get. And what did the employee see? Changed everything. There at the end of the dark alley was something that no one in the store would have ever imagined. And suddenly, everything made sense. The dog wasn't going to the store by chance. There was a reason. And now, for the first time, someone was about to discover it. The employee took a deep breath and approached, trying to see what was inside. It was then that he saw it. There, huddled against the cold, dirty wall, was another dog. Unlike the puppy, this one was older. The fur, which should have been thick and beautiful, was now dull, matted and dirty. His thin body trembled slightly, and his eyes, half open, barely seemed to react to the presence of anyone else there. He was weak, very weak, and suddenly, everything made sense. The puppy approached the weakened dog gently. First, he put his nose to it, as if checking if it was still there. Then he sat down next to him, as if to say, "I'm back, I'm here." The employee felt a lump in his throat, so that was it. The whole time that puppy was trying to ask for help. He didn't want food, I didn't want shelter. He wanted to save someone, and even though no one had understood his signs until that moment, he never gave up. The employee bent down, watching the two dogs. The cub looked at him for a moment, with that same deep look from before. But now the employee understood. What would he do now? Would I be ignorant? Or what would I just see? Or would you finally take action? Have you ever noticed how dogs seem to understand things that we humans often ignore? They don't talk. They don't write. They cannot explain to us in words what they are feeling or thinking, but somehow they know how to communicate. They know how to ask for help. They know how to show love, gratitude, and even despair if we are willing to look carefully. And that puppy knew he needed help. He just didn't know how to make humans understand. For days, he tried. For days, he returned to the same place, insisted, faced rejections, indifferent looks and doors closing in front of him. But he didn't give up, because he wasn't just fighting for himself. He didn't want food. I didn't want shelter. He wanted to save someone. And that night, for the first time, someone finally via what he was trying to show. The employee felt a shiver run through his body as his eyes adjusted to the darkness of the alley. The cub, who had previously seemed so full of energy and determination, was now calm, as if, after so many days, of trying to be understood, he knew that his mission was finally coming to an end. And wings, no singing Dubeko, was the answer to all that mystery. A dog, not a puppy, not a strong and agile animal. It was an older dog, of medium size, with a body too thin to be healthy. The fur, which must once have been beautiful, was now dirty, matted, and its paws trembled slightly on the cold floor. His eyes were open just enough to see the silhouette of the cub approaching, but he didn't move. Not because I didn't want to, but why couldn't? The employee's breath caught in his throat. My God, the scene was heartbreaking. The older dog was clearly weakened, too weak to get up, too exhausted to fight. How long was he there? How long did he spend waiting for the puppy, who ran to the store every day trying to get someone's attention? The puppy came over and lay down next to the older dog, snuggling against him, as if saying, "I came back. I told you I wouldn't leave you." The employee felt a lump in his throat. Now everything made sense. The cub was not alone. He was never alone. From the first day, from the first attempt to enter the store, he already knew where he needed to go back. He already knew that someone was waiting for him. And even though he's so small, even though he's so fragile, he never abandoned your friend. He could have run. I could have given up. He could have sought shelter elsewhere. He could have continued his life as a street dog, living one day at a time. But no, he chose to stay. He chose to fight. He chose to return to the store every day because I knew that someone at some point would realize. And now, someone noticed. The employee ran his hand over his face, trying to process everything he was seeing. Why hadn't anyone noticed this before? How many times did that puppy return to that alley, find his friend there, getting weaker and still didn't give up? How much he had to insist so that only now, someone finally stop and look. The silence in the alley was heavy in the air. The employee took a hesitant step forward. The cub didn't move. She just looked up at him. And for the first time, your eyes were full of hope. You knew that someone finally understood. Now there was only one question left. The employee, would you do something? Or like so many others, would you just turn your back? The choice he would make at that moment would change everything. Have you ever felt like you needed to do something, even though you didn't know exactly why? It was as if, at that moment, all the worries of his routine lost their importance, as if nothing else made sense other than the scene before your eyes. The employee remained still for a few seconds, feeling the weight of that discovery. The cold of the night made his skin crawl, but he knew that the cold those two dogs felt was much worse. The puppy was still there, lying next to the weakened dog, small, fragile, but with an unshakable determination. He looked at the employee expectantly, as if he was waiting for a reaction, as if saying, "Now that you've seen it, what are you going to do?" The employee swallowed hard. He was not a man who often got involved in problems that were not his. He had his own life, his own challenges. But there, at that moment, none of that mattered, because now he knew, now he understood, now he couldn't just ignore. The first thing he did was open his backpack. There wasn't much there, but he found a small snack that he brought to eat after work. He didn't think twice before picking it up and slowly lowering himself down. The cub looked closely at him. His little eyes followed every movement, but he didn't jump. He didn't advance. He didn't try to steal the food. I didn't want it for myself. He just waited. The employee broke off a piece of bread and placed it on the floor, very close to the older dog. But the dog, too weak, didn't even move. That scene made his chest tighten. It wasn't just hunger. It was exhaustion. The animal was so weak that perhaps I had already lost the strength to even eat. The puppy licked his friend's snout, as if trying to encourage him to react. But nothing happened. The older dog's breathing was slow, tired. His chest rose and fell with difficulty, as if each sigh required immense effort. If he stayed there for one more night, if no one did anything, he wouldn't see the dawn. The employee felt a lump in his throat. He didn't know much about dogs, but he knew enough to understand that there was no time to waste. So without thinking twice, he made a decision. He quickly walked back to the store. The lights were already off, the other employees had left. But he knew there was still some food stored in the back, used to ward off cats that used to invade the storeroom. He went over, grabbed a handful, and found a small plastic container. So he ran to the water fountain, filled a disposable bottle with water, and returned to the alley as quickly as he could. When he arrived, the puppy was still there in the same position. He looked at the employee as if he knew he would come back. The employee knelt on the floor and poured some water into a bottle cap. Then, carefully, he approached the older dog. The puppy got up and licked his friend's face again. This time there was a little movement. The older dog opened his eyes with difficulty. The employee felt a chill run down his spine as he realized that they were deep, filled with silent sadness, but there was something more there. Resistance. He was still fighting. The dry, cracked mouth opened slightly. The employee brought the water cap closer. At first, the dog just sniffed, as if in disbelief. But then, with difficulty, he took a small sip, then another, and another. It was as if that liquid brought a last ray of hope to him. The employee smiled, feeling his heart speed up. "That's it, boy. Drink some more." The puppy wagged its tail slightly, as if saying, "I knew you would help." Little by little, the employee poured more water into the small container, allowing the older dog to drink at his own pace. Then, he took the food and placed it in front of him. The puppy looked at the food, and this time, licked his lips. He was also hungry. The employee grabbed a handful and offered it to him. The puppy ate quickly, but without desperation. It was as if he knew that first, his oldest friend needed to feed. The older dog, however, hesitated. His body still felt too heavy, but then, with much effort, he raised his head and ate a grain of food, then another, and another one. The employee felt his chest tighten. That simple gesture seemed small, but it was gigantic, because it meant I still had strength, there was still a chance. But he knew that it wasn't enough. Water and food would provide momentary relief, but the older dog needed something only a veterinarian could provide, real treatment. And now, after seeing it all with his own eyes, after understanding that cub's silent struggle, after realizing that he never gave up, even when everyone around him ignored him, the employee knew that I couldn't just leave. Now, he had a choice to make, and that choice would change the fate of those two forever. Have you ever seen an animal completely change your life without saying a single word? Some decisions are unplanned. They simply happen. When the employee left that alley that night, his mind was full of thoughts. The image of the puppy, lying next to the weakened dog, never left his head. He found himself thinking about how many times that little dog tried to ask for help, how many times he was ignored, shooed away, treated like a nuisance. But he never gave up. He faced rejection every day because he knew that somebody needed him. And now the employee asked himself, if a puppy was capable of such loyalty, what would he, a human being, do in this situation? He knew he needed to act. I knew that if I didn't do anything, that older dog wouldn't survive long. But what could you do? He couldn't take them home. His apartment was small, he worked all day, and his lease didn't even allow pets. But leaving them there was not an option either. So as he walked home that night, he felt there was only one way to go. He would convince the store manager to help, not even if he needed to insist as much as that puppy insisted all those days. The next morning, the employee arrived earlier than usual. The manager was already there, organizing some spreadsheets in the office. He was a practical man, focused on business. He wasn't the type to waste time worrying about a stray dog, but the employee knew he had to try. He took a deep breath before knocking on the door. "Excuse me, can I talk to you for a minute?" The manager looked up, finding the formality strange. What it was. The employee hesitated for a moment, but then blurted out all at once, "It's about that dog at the entrance to the store." The manager sighed. "That dog again. I already told them to stop leaving food for him. But he is not alone." The employee interrupted, feeling his heart racing. "Last night, I followed him. I found out why he tries to come in here every day." The manager frowned, clearly intrigued but out of patience. "What reason?" The employee told everything, about how the cub came back every day, not for food or shelter, but for attention, about the older, weakened dog that waited for him every night in that dark alley, and about how he had tried to help. When he finished, the manager was silent for a few seconds. Then he sighed and leaned back in the chair. "And what do you expect me to do with it?" The employee was already expecting that answer, but he wouldn't give up. So he did exactly what the cub did all those days. He insisted. He explained that they didn't need to do much, just shelter them temporarily, a place where they could recover until a solution was found. He promised that he would take care of them, that he would find them a home. But for now, they just needed a chance. Just for a few days, just until we get something better. The manager rubbed his face, visibly uncomfortable. "This is not an NGO. You know that, right?" "I know," replied the employee, trying to contain his anxiety. "But that doesn't need to change anything. They can be in the back, away from customers. I clean, I feed, I take care of everything." The manager's silence lasted an eternity, but then he sighed and shook his head. "If they cause problems, they leave." The employee felt his heart race. "They won't cause it, I promise." He had achieved. At the end of the day, the employee returned to the alley. The puppy was there, as always, but this time, he wouldn't have to wait any longer. The employee approached slowly. The cub raised its head, alert, its eyes shining in the darkness. The older dog was the same as before, weak, tired, but still there. The employee knelt down and extended his hand. "Come on, a little friend. Today you come with me." The cub didn't hesitate. He stood up immediately, wagging his tail lightly. You knew. He felt that finally someone was listening to him. The employee carefully picked up the older dog. He was too light, too thin, but still he laid his head on his chest, as if he knew he was safe now. The cub followed alongside, walking confidently. He had achieved. After so many days fighting alone, he finally found someone who cared. And that night, for the first time, in a long time, the two dogs would sleep in a safe place. But this journey was not over yet, because now the employee had a new mission: find a forever home for them. Have you ever wondered if a stray animal has a story that no one knows? They appear in our lives suddenly, sometimes on the corner of a busy street, others at the front door looking with those eyes that seem to ask for a chance. And we thought, was he always alone? But the truth is that every animal has a past. Every animal came from somewhere, and sometimes their stories are much bigger than we can imagine. That's exactly what the employee discovered when he took the older dog to the vet. That dog, it wasn't just any street dog. He already had a home, and now his past was about to be revealed. The employee barely slept that night. The puppy and the older dog were sheltering in the back of the store in a makeshift space with some old blankets. It wasn't the most comfortable place in the world, but it was infinitely better than that dark and cold alley. The cub slept quickly, exhausted after so many days of fighting. But the older dog, he slept like someone who, for the first time in a long time, felt safe. The employee watched them for a while, feeling something different growing inside him. He had never considered himself a dog guy. I liked animals, of course, but he had never had one. He had never been so involved in a situation like this. But now, there was no turning back. Those two depended on him, and he wouldn't let them down. The next morning, before work even started, he made a decision. Needed to take the older dog to a vet. He didn't know much about animal health, but I knew enough to realize that that dog wouldn't have much longer without treatment. So he picked up the phone and called a clinic a few blocks away. "Was he found on the street?" asked the receptionist. "Yes, but he seems weakened. Need an exam." "Right. Can you bring it now?" The employee looked at the dog, still lying on the blanket. The puppy was next to him, gently licking his ear as if trying to say, "Everything will be fine." The employee took a deep breath. "Yes, I'm leaving now." He managed to convince the manager to let him leave for a few hours, and without wasting any time, he took the older dog in his arms and left the store. The puppy tried to follow him, but the employee bent down and put his hand on its head. "Calm down, friend. I'll be back soon." The cub seemed to understand, but he stayed there, standing in the doorway, watching the two walk away. The veterinary clinic was small but well equipped. The employee quickly entered, feeling the weight of the dog in his arms. "I brought the dog I mentioned on the phone," I told the receptionist. Within minutes, a veterinarian came to meet them. He looked at the dog carefully, analyzing its thin and weak body. "Let's take him inside and examine him further. Can you wait a little?" The employee nodded and sat down at the reception desk. The next few minutes seemed hours. His heart was pounding. What would you do if the vet said your dog was too sick to recover? What would you do if there was nothing else to be done? He shook his head, pushing those thoughts away. I wouldn't allow that dog to go through all that, and in the end it would be too late. Then, after what seemed like an eternity, the vet returned, and with it came the second twist of this story. The employee noticed that there was something different about the doctor's face. A curious expression, a little surprised. The basic examination showed that he is very malnourished, but he still has a chance of recovery. With good treatment, you can return to a healthy life. The employee breathed a sigh of relief, but the vet didn't end there. "But there's one more thing." He sat down and picked up a paper. "We did a microchip scan, as we do with all dogs that come here, and he has a..." The employee's eyes widened. "What?" "Yes, this dog has an owner, or at least it already has." The world seemed to spin for a second. The employee had never thought about this possibility. He believed that that dog had always been on the street, who never had anything but the puppy by her side. But no, he ever had a house. It already had a name. He already had someone who loved him. But what happened? If he had a home, why was he so thin, so weak, so alone? Was it abandoned? He got lost? The veterinarian continued. "We are trying to contact the number registered on the chip. We haven't had an answer yet, but as soon as we do, we'll be able to find out what happened." The employee felt his heart accelerate. What would happen now? If someone was really looking for this dog, would it have to be returned? What if the person who registered it, I didn't want him anymore? He looked into the treatment room and saw the older dog lying on the table, receiving IV fluids. At that moment, he wasn't just a stray dog he decided to help. He was someone with a story that was about to be discovered. And whatever the truth was, he knew that I wouldn't leave that dog alone again, because now it was part of the story too. Have you ever seen a dog waiting for someone who may never return? They don't have watches. They don't know how to count the days, but they know how to wait. And when you love someone, wait forever. The oldest dog, now called by the name that has always been his, Bruce, was no exception. How long did he stay there? Weak, without strength, just resisting. How long did that puppy, so small and innocent, carry the responsibility of taking care of him alone? And now, after so much suffering, so much cold, so many closed doors, life was about to change for both of them. Because, for the first time in a long time, Bruce I wouldn't have to wait any longer. The person he loved was coming. The employee was restless. Ever since the vet said he had been able to contact Bruce's owner, his chest had been feeling tight. A part of him was relieved. After all, the dog had a family. But another part another part felt afraid, because even if they found the person registered on the microchip, that didn't mean I wanted Bruce back. Many dogs are abandoned by those who should love them. What if Bruce had been just one more? If that call was just a formality before they found out he was no longer wanted? The employee looked at the puppy, who was cuddled close to his friend. He was always close. It always stayed next to him, as if saying she wouldn't leave him no matter what. And maybe Bruce had only survived so far because of that little dog that refused to give up. And now, everything was about to change. The next day, the vet confirmed Bruce's owner was coming to get him. The employee held his breath. Did he tell you anything? The vet nodded. He said Bruce disappeared months ago. He looked for him everywhere, placed ads, visited shelters, but never found him. The employee felt his chest tighten. So Bruce was not abandoned. He got lost. And all this time, someone was waiting for him. The thought made a lump form in his throat, because he remembered the look on Bruce's face when he found him in that dark alley. That look. It wasn't just tiredness. It was longing, missing a home he thought he would never have again. But now that home was coming back to him. Bruce's family arrived that afternoon. It was a middle-aged man and his teenage daughter. They were nervous, anxious, but there was something about them that the employee noticed immediately. Love. As soon as they entered the clinic, the man's eyes lit up. Where is he? The vet led them to the kennel where Bruce was recovering. The employee stood from afar, watching. And then it happened. Bruce, who was still lying down resting, raised his head. His eyes were sleepy, until he saw them. For a second, everything was silent. The man's daughter covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes teary. The man took a step forward, his voice cracking. Bruce! Bruce blinked, as if that name was sleeping inside him. And then, something unbelievable happened. He got up. The dog that could barely move its paws a few days ago. The dog that had been found on the verge of collapse. The dog who spent so long waiting that maybe I no longer believed that this day would come. He got up and took a step, then another, and then male. The man fell to his knees when Bruce reached him. The dog put his nose to him, sniffed his face, his chest, as if wanting to make sure he was real, and as soon as he realized that era, collapsed into the owner's arms. The daughter knelt beside them, hugging them, and Bruce cried. A low sound, a lament of longing, of relief, from someone who, after wandering for so long, finally found the way back home. The employee blinked several times, feeling his eyes burning. He was not an emotional person, but this was different, because for the first time he saw, what does a dog's loyalty really mean? Bruce never forgot his family, and your family never stopped looking for him, and now after so much time, after so much pain, they were together again. The puppy watched everything from afar. He didn't quite understand what was happening. All he knew was that his friend, the dog he fought so hard to protect, now I was happy. Bruce looked at him. The little dog wagged its tail. They had won. His mission was accomplished. But then, the man and his daughter turned to the cub. The employee felt his chest tighten. And the little one? Asked the man. The employee opened his mouth to respond, but the daughter got ahead of him. He was the one who saved Bruce, wasn't he? The vet nodded. If it weren't for him, Bruce probably wouldn't have survived. He never abandoned him. The man looked at the cub with an excited smile. The little dog tilted his head, curious, and then his daughter whispered, "Can he come with us?" The employee's heart skipped a beat. Bruce was already heading home. But the puppy, he never had a home. He never had anyone look at him and say, "Come on, you're part of the family now." But now, he had this chance. The man looked at Bruce, still kneeling beside him. "What do you think, boy? Can he come too?" Bruce raised his head. He looked at the cub, and then he wagged his tail. The answer was given. The little dog was no longer alone. The employee let out a deep sigh, feeling something he couldn't describe. Bruce was going home, and now, the puppy had one too. One where I would never have to fight alone again. One where he would be loved. And for the first time in his life, he ran towards someone without fear, because he knew that this time, it was forever. Some stories are just everyday events. They go unnoticed and are lost in time. But others carry something so deep that they spread, touch hearts, and transform lives. And that's exactly what happened to Bruce and the little cub. What started with a dog insisting on going into a store every day ended up becoming an unforgettable lesson about love, friendship, and loyalty. And when people heard the story, something incredible happened. The employee never imagined that a simple stray dog could change his perspective on life so much. When Bruce was taken home, the pup went with him, jumping excitedly in the car, as if he knew he was starting a new chapter. But what he didn't know was that his story, it didn't end there, because something unexpected started to happen. People started to talk about him. The store employees who previously just shooed that puppy away now told his story with a twinkle in their eyes. Customers who saw him sitting at the door day after day began to ask what had happened, and when they discovered that all that was not just insistence but an act of pure and true love, they got emotional. The store manager, who initially didn't want to get involved, listened silently, and for the first time was speechless, because, without meaning to, he had also been part of that story. He had been one of those who didn't see what was right in front of his eyes. But now I knew that puppy always been trying to say something, and it was only because someone finally he heard that Bruce was given a second chance. The story spread, first among the store's customers, then to neighbors, friends, co-workers. Someone posted about the case on a social network, and in a matter of days, the publication already had thousands of likes and comments. People from the neighborhood, from other cities, even from distant places, were moved by the journey of that little hero. Animals have a heart that many humans don't have. What a beautiful story. I cried with emotion. This puppy never gave up. He knew he needed to save his friend. And little by little, what was just a local event became a symbol of love and loyalty. Because that puppy didn't just save Bruce, he taught people. He showed that true love doesn't need words, that loyalty does not demand anything in return, and that even when the world ignores us, it's always worth keeping trying, because at some point, someone will see the real us. The employee still found himself thinking about everything that happened. He remembered the first day he saw that puppy trying to enter the store. I remembered how at first I just saw him as a nuisance. And now he knew that little dog had changed his life forever. He would never look at a stray animal the same way again. I would never ignore what cannot be said with words, because sometimes all someone needs is let us really pay attention. May we see beyond the surface. And when that happens, miracles can happen. Bruce was saved. The puppy found a home. And on the way, they united hearts that might never have crossed paths otherwise, because love has that power, even in the most unlikely places, even in the smallest souls. Even when no one else believes, he always finds a way to win. Stories like this make us remember what really matters, how much animals teach us about love, loyalty, and even never give up on the ones we love. And if this journey moved you, if it made you feel that special connection with these two inseparable friends, just imagine what comes next. The next story will tug at your heartstrings even more and show you something you may have never stopped to think about. Now you can let more people know about this incredible lesson. A simple like helps this message reach more hearts. And if you want to continue following stories that touch the soul and make us see animals in an even more special way, sign up. There's a lot of exciting things coming up. And tell me in the comments, what word defines this story for you? He writes loyalty, if she made you feel the power of that unbreakable bond. I'll love to see how many people felt the same way. Now, the next video is already waiting for you, and I guarantee you, he will captivate you from start to finish. Press the video and get ready for another story that will stay with you for a long time.